truth? Bring it on.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Do you want the whole truth?
I don't think you're ready.
Governments don't control things. A government can't control the economy without controlling people.
It's Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. Here comes the truth.
Welcome back. Hour 2, Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. Proudly on. Say it with me now. AFR Talk. And have you ever wondered what the truth was about tax cuts? I mean, what does history tell us? Because you hear a lot about paying for tax cuts and different types of tax cuts, but what is the truth? Because we have the president saying, look, we need more money from those at the top to pay their fair share. We have an economic policy not based on the liberation of the free market, but rather the government attempting to get more money and finding more money somehow, some way. We have the internet tax being floated, a whole host of things to fund what the government can do to make sure that we have access to education and early child care. Brian Domitrovich holds a PhD in history from Harvard University. He is an associate professor and chairman of the Department of History at Sam Houston University. He writes a weekly column for Forbes. His book, Iconoclasts, The Rebels Who Sparked the Supply Side Revolution and Restored American Prosperity. Dr. Domitrovich, welcome back. Great to be with you. What's the truth about tax cuts?
Crane, the thing is, in the 20th century, there were only three really great eras of economic growth in the United States, the 1920s, the 1960s, and the 1980s and 90s. Every one of those eras was sparked by a tax cut. If you take out the economic growth that came in the wake of tax cuts in modern American history, you basically have stagnation since the 19th century.
So bottom line, when we hear that tax cuts have caused recessions, not true?
Well, it's completely wrong. I mean, if you look at the empirical data, tax cut came in 1921. We had the greatest era of growth in the century over the next 8 years. When the Depression came in the early 1930s, that was in anticipation of a massive tax increase in 1932 under Herbert Hoover, not even under FDR. There actually was another tax cut in 1947, which Harry Truman vetoed, but the Congress overrode it, and that began post-war prosperity, which was then souped up with the historic Kennedy tax cut of 1964. And then, of course, the great boom of the 1980s and 1990s came on the heels of the Ronald Reagan tax cut of 1981.
So we see an economy that has been predicted year after year to be twice of what it should be, and that is by the people forming the economic policy of this country, and that would be out of the Obama administration, be it Jack Lew or otherwise. The question is, why are we not recovering the way we have in past recessions?
We've learned over hard experience since the Federal Reserve and the income tax were both founded in the same year, 100 years ago this year in 1913, that the secret to prosperity in this country is the government getting out of the way. That means the Federal Reserve has to have restraint. You have to have a sound monetary policy, preferably a gold-backed currency, and you have to have tax restraint. You have to have tax cuts, not tax increases. When you have monetary restraint and tax cuts, you have a booming economy. If you have a bloated Federal Reserve and tax structure, you have extended recessions like we have now.
What would you advise Ben Bernanke to do?
Crane, that's the funny thing. It's so simple. If you just hold back those institutions, if the Fed's going wild, get it to do nothing but pay attention to the soundness of the dollar. Make sure it doesn't migrate against gold in any fashion. You will see people rush into the dollar because all of a sudden it has value. And if you cut taxes, they're going to rush into it more. And you'll see profits go up. And when profits go up, jobs come. And you'll see the 15 million unemployed dwindle to 5 million. 10 million new jobs were created in the 1980s because of tax cuts, 30 million actually. So it's very simple. I mean, if Ben Bernanke and Barack Obama wanted to reestablish the soundness of the dollar and cut taxes, would have a historic boom.
When we talk about the soundness of the dollar, a strong dollar, it is something that we hear about maybe the third point as opposed to the first point. I believe it is the first point for you because you look at economic history, be it Reagan, be it Clinton, and then you also see a weak dollar under President Bush and President Obama. It really, strong dollar, strong economy?
Absolutely.
Yes?
There can't be any
Yeah.
question about that. What a strong dollar means is that everyone around the world wants the dollar. If everyone around the world wants the dollar, then that means there's going to be a lot of investment in this country, and investment is the key to jobs. One of the reasons people will want the dollar is if investments denominated in dollars will have a nice rate of return. They won't have a nice rate of return if taxes are high because you have to give so much profits to the taxman. It's funny how monetary policy and fiscal policy are two sides of the same coin. They both have to be restrained at once. Have a sound dollar and tax cuts, and you will see money roar into economic activity.
Can we recover, or, excuse me, can monetary policy change as Chairman of the Fed, Ben Bernanke, speaks to tapering off the QE forever it might be, but bottom line, he speaks to that, and it chills markets for the time, and it also goes to raising interest rates. And my question is, we're in a bad way right now. I'm Captain Obvious on that one, I know. But the question I have is there a way to go from where we are now and not have a downturn that has high interest rates, high inflation, and in essence, more pain before we actually get going in the right direction?
Crane, there is no reason for any pain at all. We should have nothing but good things. The problem is that Ben Bernanke is flying blind. If he tightens money, he tightens into a tax code that has been increased thanks to Barack Obama, and Obamacare and the promises of the incumbent president are for further tax increases. So the investor who's thinking about putting money in the U.S. economy is looking at all those tax increases. If Bernanke tightens money now, then you're going to have a very little amount of money deployed anywhere. If the president and Congress cut taxes, the demand for money would increase, Bernanke would not have to taper, and the dollar would strengthen. We learned this in the early 1980s. Paul Volcker, who was chairman of the Fed in 1981 when Ronald Reagan became president, tightened money crazily, and we had a terrible recession while Reagan was cutting taxes. And what the tax cuts were doing was creating this incredible new demand for U.S. dollars. And then Volcker started releasing money, loosening money, and he found that, wow, you have this incredible boom because people want the money on account of tax cuts. So Bernanke is flying blind if he has no leadership from Capitol Hill or the White House. I mean, if we had a tax cut, there would be huge demand for the U.S. dollar.
You've put it out there as fairly obvious of what to do, definite right answer. Why is it that we don't have what Paul Krugman has advised, what President Obama has done and speaks to, as well as Bernanke, being exposed for what it is? Because the record's clearly there now. Are you at times very frustrated at the information gap between the American people and the policies that we are seeing economically?
Let me tell you, I'm very frustrated about this economic performance. Now, 4.5 years in, pushing 5 years into it, Barack Obama's economic growth record is worse than George W. Bush's. Now, look, George W. Bush came into office at an economic peak, the Bill Clinton peak of 2000, 2001, and he built a growth rate of 1.6% per year after that. Barack Obama's is now less than that, and he inherited an economic trough. So the base from which he could build economic growth was very low. Bush's was very high. It's exceedingly frustrating. The history of this country is of economic growth of 4 or 5% per year for the long term. We are at one-third that level, and this country cannot be great with that kind of growth rate.
How to remedy it? Well, read Dr. Demetrius' books. Iconoclast, The Rebels Who Sparked the Supply-Side Revolution and Restored American Prosperity, as well as his weekly column in Forbes. Dr. Dimitrovic, thank you very much. It is always a pleasure, and I look forward to speaking with you soon. Thank you.
Great to be here, Greg.
Take care. All right. Wow, you just got a lot of information, and it was solid, big time. Hope you were listening. I hope Paul Krugman was listening. I don't know if it would help. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. Coming up, Hans von Spakovsky, AFR Talk.
19-year Air Force veteran dismissed for defending natural marriage. I am Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. We'll talk about this next on Freedom's Call. 1 year before being eligible for retirement benefits, a veteran of the United States Air Force was relieved of his